Item 1 is apologies.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Stewart Rice.
Right, thank you. And 2 then is disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests. No, and then to approve the minutes of the previous meeting, which is on pages 1 and 2. So it's page 1 and 2. Yep, somebody move. Yeah. Okay, lovely, thanks. And then straight on to 4. You will be getting there, Andrew. Which is the More Homes Delivery Programme. Before we pass on to you, Andrea, would you like to say a few words as Cabinet Member? Thank you for coming in.
Yes, please, Chair. And thank you, and thanks to the committee for the opportunity to come here today to talk through the More Homes programme. As I know members will be aware, we had a change in the powers to be able to return to building again. That's been for a number of years now. And in the beginning, what we did was we cautiously approached it with smaller sites. That was an intentional decision to test mainly the capabilities in-house of building services to build ground-up sites. So we've got a number of sites which have evolved the current programme as it stands today. We started with Passive House and moved quickly on to the Homes as Power Stations model, closely linked to our Swansea standard. But that Swansea standard is continuously being reviewed in terms of making it as cost efficient as we can, looking at the layouts of properties so that we hit the Welsh Housing Quality Standard and Welsh Design Quality requirement, but at the same time get best value for the public purse, mainly the HRA and also the social housing grant that we apply for. So we've made really good progress to date. Just wanted the opportunity to place on record my thanks to the delivery teams, both in housing and building services. And I know that the officers, Carol and Rosie, are going to take us through the detail of the report today. So I won't say any more than that, but happy to take any questions that come our way following their outlining of the report, Chair.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for that. When you're asking about the question, when you're asking about questions, as you're well aware, with the STC, we don't go back. We're not scrutinising what's been done. We may refer to what's been done, but very difficult with this report to find how we can add to how you go forward. So without that, further ado, who's taking us?
Thanks, Chair. I will. And thanks, Councillor Lewis. I'll take you through kind of the highlights of the report. I mean, I'm assuming you've read the detail of it. I know Councillor Lloyd has, because we've had a discussion about some issues already. And then obviously, yeah, as Councillor Lewis said, we're here to answer any questions after, really. So, Councillor Lewis has set out the background, really. The More Homes development programme started, or first got approved in 2019 following the initial Passive House pilot at Collier's Way. It was a smaller ambition to start with, 140 homes, but when the social housing grant rules changed, which meant local authorities could access them, the borrowing requirements changed, the ambition increased to look at delivering 1,000 additional council homes over a 10-year period. So we're kind of, in the midst of that at the moment. I mean, we are acutely conscious, and I know the committee, and I know, councillors are, the housing crisis is worse than it's ever been. We know that we need to pick up the pace of delivery, both in scale and the speed that we're getting schemes delivered. But there's a number of challenges that we're facing with that, which I'll come on to in a bit. But the housing waiting list is the highest it's ever been, at around 8,000 people on it. We've got 300 households in temporary accommodation. So these are all figures I'm sure you're familiar with. But, the crisis shows no sign of changing. So our progress to date, since the initial pilot, we've delivered 255 additional homes. That's not just new build, that's a mixed strategy of acquisitions. We've got a really active formal right to buy acquisition programme, which we've ramped up in recent years because it delivers additional council property to us so quickly. The development process takes a really long time, and we don't deliver it. We don't have the capacity to deliver at the huge numbers that are required, but the acquisitions, a former right to buy is a kind of no-brainer for us, really. We add to the stock really quickly. So there've been 88 new builds from 5 schemes, including a kind of a test model of modular homes in the Bryn House development in the grounds of that, modular passive house pods. Property conversions we focused on as well, which the most recent were East Side and Penlan district offices, but that's given us an additional 21 units out of 6 kind of conversion projects. And then acquisitions, which you can see at the moment anyway, has been the largest contributor to that. We've actually got a further 10 acquisitions that we'll complete by the end of this year, so we'll be up to 265 additional council properties. As Councillor Lewis said, you know, we focused on the new builds to the Swansea standard. They've been built as homes as power station. They're resulting in really low energy bills for the tenants in those properties. We're working really closely with the Welsh School of Architecture to monitor the performance of those properties. It's a really interesting, useful partnership for us as well, because they're looking at tenants' experiences of using those new technologies. We'll be getting a report from them at some point in the summer, which should have some really interesting data for us. And I said, you know, local authorities, social landlords have to build to different requirements to private developers. You know, we get social housing grant, which I'll touch on a bit more detail in a minute. But Welsh Government set high standards for space standards, safety and security. We're not allowed to install fossil fuel boilers anymore in social housing homes. You know, they've got to be an EPC A rating, all of which, you know, adds to the development costs for social landlords. But social housing grant is there to help us fund that. So the More Homes programme is funded, again, it's a mix of Welsh Government grants, the main one being social housing grant, and then the HRA capital budget. So we've got 56 million at the moment allocated for the next 4 years with the schemes that are included in this property, plus some land acquisition. We're going to buy the former Gorsinan Junior School for a development site, which we're quite excited about because it's one of the biggest ones. It's a nice flat site, which many of our sites aren't. I mean, they all come with issues, but this is going to be a good one for us, we think. And feasibility assessments, one of the things we have to do is undertake surveys. We've got, I mean, I will come on to the challenges, but the portfolios of site we have within the HRA are really challenging. They're sites that we didn't sell off to RSLs or developers over the years a long time ago. So they come with their own issues in terms of abnormal costs, either being sloping or on contaminated land. You know, but that's our land, you know, and again, as a local authority, we do have different priorities. It's about regenerating the estates. It's about making the best use of this land, even if it's not maybe the most desirable development land. We've got levers at our disposal to kind of utilise it as opposed to leaving it empty. So social housing grant is the main grant. It's also used by RSLs, and we work closely with the RSLs in the allocation of that grant to make sure it's spent every year. I think a sign really the Welsh Government's commitment to house building and social housing is the increase in social housing grants. So since 2018, it's more than doubled the amount of social housing grant it's made available for Wales. So Swansea's allocation for 23-24 was 27.3 million. So that's for us and RSLs compared to 8 million in 2018. So you can see there's been a huge, you know, increase in the funding available. I mean, the issue is you don't know how long Welsh Government will maintain that level, but new social housing is a massive priority for them. So there's also a number of different funds that we've been using to help us. So I've mentioned that our HRA land can be challenging. So Welsh Government acknowledge that, they understand that. And there's a fund called Land and Builder Development Fund, which will pay 100% of kind of land preparation costs, which in effect can make the difference between a site being viable or too costly to develop. So we've had that for a few of our schemes. There's a transitional accommodation capital programme, so TACP, which is just additional funding to try and bring forward homes more quickly to help alleviate the homelessness crisis. So we've used that for East Side and Penlan. That's how we funded those. We've been able to use it for a number of our right to buy acquisitions, and we're also going to apply for it for conversion of the Spark Centre in Blaenau Maes, which is something we're embarking on this year. I mentioned that social housing grant wasn't available to local authorities until quite recently. So the schemes prior to 2020 were funded by the HRA, but also part funded by IHP, which was the Welsh Government's Innovative Housing Programme funding, which funded all the renewables, so all the renewable energy costs and stuff, and technology associated with that. That fund has now ended and it's all kind of wrapped up in social housing grant. Finally, we've recently been awarded money for the Brondeg House Scheme, again to cover the cost of the technologies, the solar panels, etc., from the City Deal HAPS fund. So again, we're constantly kind of looking at whatever grants are out there really to help make our schemes more affordable. So kind of onto page 7 of the report, I've listed the schemes that are well underway and accounted to start within the next 4-year capital programme, really. Not all of them will be delivered within that time period. Some of you will be familiar with some of these schemes, but Brondeg House will be the first one to start in the summer, followed by Creswell Road, and then we've got Heel Dinners. Milford Sites A and B is a different approach that we're taking. And I talk about that in some of the challenges, but we're looking at going out to tender for a development partner. So those 2 sites that we own, what we will do is tender on Sell to Wales for a development partner to develop those sites with the agreement that the council will buy back 40% of those properties, which very early concept plans, shows that both sites together will probably avail of about 100 properties. So the council will buy back 40 of them. We suspect it'll be an RSL that shows an interest because the sites will need social housing grant, but time will tell over the coming months when the tender goes out. The other additional thing we've got on here that we haven't done before and is new for us is acquisition of Section 106 properties from developers. So there's a significant one with the Garden Village with the Persimmon development there, which I think has started on site now. We will get 141 of those properties over that whole lifetime. So I think it's about there's about 700 properties in total in that scheme, and it'll come in phases, probably over 8 years, and we will buy back 141 of them. This is section. I'm sure many of you, you're all familiar with Section 106 agreements. Generally, in the past, it's always been housing associations that have taken on the Section 106 properties from private developers, but the council's in the game now. We've got money to be able to do it, so we're keen to use that as another option. A lot of the big schemes, housing associations have already got their sort of interest in, but as things come up, we'll speak to colleagues in regeneration and planning to kind of, get the council's chance to, acquire some of those. I've also included then the pipeline schemes. I mean, the longer, these are the sites that we're currently working on now to look at the feasibility and the kind of concept plans and the best way to deliver them. So work is underway with that. It's harder to predict the longer term pipeline just because of HRA budget issues, which I think are, gone into a lot of detail in the capital budget reports that are going to council next week. But it's just to show really that we've got a pipeline, and those are all schemes that we're actively working on now to get the site information that we need, and just to look at really the best way to deliver them. So as I've spoken, I've mentioned some of the challenges and opportunities, but clearly the HRA budget pressure is the biggest problem facing us at the moment. I mean, we've got high ambitions for the More Homes programme, but then Welsh Government have also got ambitious policies for local authorities and social housing providers to decarbonise the housing stock. There's also the introduction of the new Welsh Housing Quality Standard 2, which is bringing additional responsibilities to us for our homes, and also just revenue costs are increasing across the board because of inflationary pressures, pay rises and that kind of thing. So it's challenging, certainly is challenging to meet the targets. We need to speed up how quickly we're delivering our properties, the new properties. I've mentioned that we've got a really challenging portfolio of sites to deal with. And we've mentioned delays in statutory planning and SAB, but it's not just that. It's around how the time we're taking internally to design schemes to respond to their comments. So there is really good internal working with colleagues in those areas, but it's just about being able to come to agreeable solutions really that are acceptable to kind of all parties. And I don't think we're alone in dealing with those issues. I think those issues apply across all developers, private and social. So we've got a number of actions underway to work with these strategies. I mean, there's not everything's within our gift, but there are certain things we can do to, particularly around the speed of delivery. So I mentioned we're looking at alternative way to bring forward the Milford sites, which is to go outside for a development partner. The other thing we want to do, so we want to test really how quickly you can bring a scheme from start to finish by using completely external expertise. So there's a role kind of within construction called an employer's agent, which is widely used by RSLs and developing local authorities, where they come from a firm with a huge amount of social housing building experience. We're speaking to a couple now. We're putting a brief together for that to take on Gulsine Business Park for us and just help us from start to finish, really. So, you know, with the brief, with the engaging the design consultants and getting us through to tender, contract and construction. Because we need to see, really, we need to test the different approaches and the different models and of how delivery works. So we're also, I mean, I've mentioned we're going to taking surveys and viability, you know, more detailed. It's got upfront costs for site surveys, but it does really help us understand the land that we're dealing with and issues that sometimes come up. We found with existing projects are coming up later on down the line, which maybe cause delays. So we need to have better intelligence in terms of what's kind of happening on the ground. Councillor Lewis mentioned kind of the review of the Swansea standard and the standard that we're building to. So at the moment, building services are undertaking a review of kind of the construction method on the Swansea standard, the layouts, and then an evaluation of the energy strategy. At the moment, we go through everything, but you know there are cost savings to be made in terms of maybe using air source heat pump instead of ground source heat pumps. You know, there is a debate to be had of whether battery storage is best for the tenants, certainly, but is it best for us from a cost perspective when they get benefits, you know, they get other benefits. And I think the work with Welsh School of Architecture will really help inform that as well. An interesting point to mention is Welsh Government. We're involved in a project with Welsh Government and 20 other social landlords in Wales. We're Welsh Government because they want to improve the supply lines for local Welsh businesses in terms of house building. Welsh Government have engaged a kind of well-known architectural firm to develop a pattern book of net carbon zero properties for use across, but from social housing landlords across Wales. So I think there's about 13 different house types, and there'll be, you know, a range of sort of options in terms of the renewable technology. So we're involved with that. I mean, you know, if there's a national, I mean, you can change the look of the properties, but the layout, you know, if we've got something that's really kind of nailed down, that might help us in the future. But again, it'll come down to how much those properties, you know, cost to build. We plan to maintain our acquisition budget at least for the next 3 years for the right to buy scheme, potentially longer, but just in terms of monies that is available, in 3 years we should have quite a lot of new build schemes underway, so the budget will get eaten up with those. But for now, while it's a little bit quieter on that, we're making sure that we kind of acquire properties that way. And yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, you know, future Section 106 opportunities, we'll keep our eyes open for that as well. So that's the main points of the report. Happy if there's any questions now.
Excellent.
Yeah, can you under the acquisitions, can you purchase the former RTP?
Right to buy, sorry.
Sorry?
Right to buy.
Right. Oh, right.
Sorry.
I thought it was RTV.
Because that's obviously right on the edge of my board, do you know what I mean? That's what-
Sorry. Yeah. Well, we
Right,
focus
okay,
on those
yeah,
because
yeah.
they're.
And not,
I'm sorry.
yeah,
Go on.
sorry, yeah, and also, would it, under the, within the regulations, would there be any scope, like, I know for a fact that we have got some light properties within City and County Swansea, would there be any scope for us to taking them over and bring them in, plus to perhaps get them brought up to the quality housing we need, and also we've got a lot of old buildings like churches and that, which obviously just sitting idle in communities. And I know there's been one that was transformed not so long back in the Cabinet Members Ward on in Morriston, on the corner of just opposite the old post office. At the Edmonds post office still there, but that they've really transformed that into housing, which was the church. But I'm just wondering whether was there any scope within the sort of legislation that we're working under to possibly get those buildings back into use for housing as well?
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps if I can come in first and then I'll hand over to Rosie to pick up anything that I've missed out on. So in terms of buying private properties from private landlords, it's often easier for us to buy back ex-council houses because they're built to a standard that we know of, we know the history, and also in terms of meeting the necessary requirements like Welsh Housing Quality Standard, for example, and converting those back. There's also a benefit as well, particularly if we've got neighbouring properties, semi-detached as an example, where one is private, one is council. There's clear benefits to us being able to, refurbish those and bring them both up to a good standard. Because I think we're all aware as ward councillors with council housing in our wards, the private properties do tend to stick out like a sore thumb compared to the ones which have been brought up to Welsh Housing Quality Standard. And no surprise really when we've invested £500 million over the last decade in terms of bringing those properties up to that standard. But we do still look at private properties and we don't rule them out completely. So I guess the option would be, if you know of private landlords or private properties in your wards, put them through to the team and they can assess the feasibility and the viability of taking those on. In terms of churches specifically, at one point I was, as cabinet member and through my WLGA role, involved in the faith in homelessness. The main approach to that was that there are a lot of empty churches of all denominations, and the admirable approach from the faith in housing was to consider those churches being converted into social housing so that they could help bridge the gap. But one of the things which has been a bit of a stumbling block and difficulties in terms of most of them are graded buildings. They've been in disrepair for quite a number of years, and the sheer cost of bringing those back into use would be immense for us to take that burden on through the HRA. But if there was certainly Welsh Government funding that could enable that, I'm sure that would definitely be something that we can consider. And also, when we look at churches, they are built for a certain purpose and don't necessarily always lend themselves to conversion. So we're acutely aware of that as well. So we take every opportunity that we can to try and find properties in our communities. And my advice would be, if you see any, refer them through to the team. And the other thing, which I don't think is necessarily a housing function, but empty properties and bringing empty properties back into use. We've also, as a council, got our grants to offer to the owners to entice them to bring those back into use, which we can then nominate tenants for up to 2 years. I think is it longer now, Carol?
Yeah, there's a couple of different schemes now. So there's the National Empty Home Scheme.
Yeah.
Plus we work with Sally, the Empty Property Officer. So we try always to try and bring properties back into use. We have looked at a number of former commercial properties as well, some quite famous ones you might know of in Swansea. But as Andrea alluded to, the costs of converting those would have just been, well, it would have just bankrupted us really. The cost was so high, even with, huge amounts of grants in them. And we just had to walk away, unfortunately, from a few of those opportunities. We just couldn't afford it. And I think if we know those buildings have been empty for a while and every other developer has looked at them and every RSL has already looked at them, then it's unlikely that we'd be able to make it work without significant, as you say, additional funding from other sources. But yeah, send any opportunities you see, send them through, and we'll certainly consider them.
Anything else you want to say about that now? Because Andrea did mention you. Yeah. If not, before I come in, I got Will as the only one.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report. Just 2 questions from me, really. First one, when we're looking at using the employer's agent, is that really because of capacity within the council, or is it to try and see if we can do things differently and cheaper? And will there be, after we've finished that project and used that employees agent to do that project, will we have a sort of report where we can see quite clearly the pros and cons against the two? That's the first question. I've got one more as well, Chair. Thanks.
Oh, I was on. Yeah, well, all those things really. You know, we want to deliver things faster. We're conscious that, you know, particularly when we're looking at the bigger scheme, and Gwysainen Business Park, for example, we want to see if there's any feasibility for delivering low cost home ownership, even if it's just a small number of units. And you need more, I suppose, specialist commercial experience in that, and being able to deliver that, which we, you know, I don't mind saying we don't have that internally at the moment, and it, you know, we see it as a really excellent learning opportunity. And having spoken to colleagues in some other local authorities like Cardiff, Powys, and Caerphilly recently, anyway, and the RSLs, is a kind of standard industry approach. And I think, you know, we've delivered today, but we want to do more, and we want to make it as, you know, cost effective as we can. So this would be an opportunity to learn from somebody who's got that much wider social housing experience across Wales, particularly, you know, because the rules are different in Wales to England. So, you know, in terms of a report, but I mean, obviously we would want to, you know, look at that in detail, and, you know, if that's something that the committee wants to look at in the future, yes. But what I would say is, you know, it's some time from the, you know, getting them on board to the delivery, the final sort of delivery of the scheme. You know, we've learned that it does take several years for developments to come to fruition, so it might not be for some time, but, you know, we'd be happy to come back and share our experiences.
Okay, thanks. My second question is just a personal passion of mine, or passion is probably the wrong word, personal project or cause, I suppose, of mine. I grew up in a multi-generational home where I lived with my grandparents, and that benefited my parents from a sort of childcare point of view. And my grandparents obviously got to spend a lot of time with us as family members. I'm just wondering, I have brought it up on a number of occasions in other committee meetings and places, but I'm just wondering if there's a possibility of us doing a pilot somewhere with a multi-generational housing with the council. So, for example, say a 3-bedroom house with a granny annex next door, and I'm sure there's, you know, tens of families in Swansea that would be very interested in those. I'm just wondering if that's at all possible in any of the projects we've got coming up, please.
Yeah, good, Andrea. I know that the cost would come into it, because building something like that, we may build 3 council houses instead. Andrea.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Thomas. I know he's raised this with me on several occasions, and I have put it through to Carol and the team to consider the proposal. Firstly, to come back to the first question, I think maybe Rosie might want to mention something about when we benchmark what we're doing internally against the commercial sector as well, because we are doing that aside from the Gwysainen Business Park. We're doing that as well to make sure that we're good value for money in-house. And it's important for us to compare apples with apples in terms of the Welsh Housing Quality Standard, because obviously the social housing standards are much, much higher than the private sector standards. But in terms of Councillor Thomas's suggestion, particularly in regards to the granny annex, I can certainly see, as Cabinet member, the benefits to having an older relative living on site, living in a separate independent accommodation alongside the property, in terms of childcare, or you know, in terms of their loneliness and a level of independence, while at the same time having that family support to lean on. But as you rightly point out, there aren't many properties that would be able to accommodate that kind of accommodation. We'd still fall into the category of that granny annex, even though you could describe it as an annex. It would still have to come up to Welsh Housing Quality Standard and DQR, which is a significant cost, but also in terms of the room sizes and the layout, there aren't many properties that we hold within our ownership that have that level of garden or additional outdoor space to be able to accommodate that. So it is something that we've looked at. I won't mention it any further because I'm sure Carol and Rosie will want to come in with a bit more detail on that. But we have taken his suggestion very seriously, Chair, just to give a bit of reassurance around that.
Yeah, I think it just unfortunately comes down to the finances, as you said. So the grant requirements and the space standards are quite strict. The social housing grant covers, you know, certain floor areas, etc., all worked out on space standards. So unfortunately, it would be something that we'd have to do, you know, fund from the HRA. It wouldn't be covered by the funding. And as you say, then it would take the funding away from building additional homes. So unfortunately, it's not something that's covered in the grant regime.
Yeah, thanks, that Will. The first thing that jumps out on me is that if we went down that road and we did do it, and you know, your parent will come in and move, and your parent passes away. So what happens then? We've got big issues with single people living in 3-bedroom houses. So, you know, and I've got 2 living opposite me where extensions were built. The person passed away, and we can't get rid of the people, isn't the right word, I suppose, but we can offer the people to move on to other accommodation for us to have the extra room there for disabled people, but we can't do it. So, you know, we'd have to get over that hurdle first. I don't see anybody else. First of all,
sorry, Chair, can I just follow up just very quickly, if that's okay? I just was wondering if you could, if there is any opportunity to feed that into Welsh Government with the grants, just about the sizing standards, just about how it probably could be looked at separately. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, they take that on board. Yeah, they're all nodding here, Will, so you're okay. First of all, just a comment on the report. I think it's very difficult for us to add anything to the report because we are looking at the future, and unfortunately for us, you've already looked into the future. Yeah, you've gone over 3 years down the line, which we can't go any further because there may be a new administration in years to come. We don't know. But first of all, my first worry was on page 1, where the housing waiting list is currently 8,000, which is very, very worrying, because the question is, if we are building 200 a year, if that's going up by 300 a year, you know, we're not getting anywhere. So it is a worry. And I have looked into it because I thought 8,000 households, then I could be on 4 waiting lists. But it's not, it's 8,000 separate people. So, and that's even more worrying than what I thought it was. So that's the first, like, well, it's a big problem. Then you mentioned houses as power stations. It was 2 years ago, I think, or 3 years ago, when we were called something else. We went to a site visit to the new houses as power stations in Neath. So we went round that when they were building them, and I got to be honest, I was very, very impressed with them. Unfortunately, the cost of doing this, as you know, is great for people moving in because their energy bills, I don't think they reached treble £1,800 a year, and it was absolutely fantastic. And then when you're moving on to what we've done, and we've gone from 255 to 265, I did put, yeah, do we look at private houses to buy? But we've covered that, so we won't go into it again. Then Swansea standard, I think that's excellent, the Swansea standard, because it's houses as power stations as well. But then you look, how can we make it, how can we cut the cost? You know, about the batteries, because the ones we looked into, they were Tesla batteries, and I don't suppose they were cheap either. And of course, the ground source heat pumps are cheaper. No, they're not. The other heat pumps, air source heat pumps, are cheaper than the other ones. So yes, and of course we've got to do the EPC rating A, which again is a very high standard for us to reach. The question then on the social housing grant, because now we look after it. So how do we then how do we then divide it up? Do the government say we have got to give X amount to social landlords because we could be greedy and say, no, we'll do it all ourselves? Because, you know, that's another thing, is how do we then share it out? Because, you know, we've got a lot of work as well. And I was going to ask about the Innovative House Programme until you said it's ended. So there's no question on that now. But that's it. How do we share that? How do we share that that money out? Then we went down to you know, you mentioned Blondake House, Creswell House, and you've got external on some of them. So the external, is that an external social landlord, or is an external developer doing it for us?
Developer.
So, and then the favourite is the 106. So it goes to planning, 106, 20% social or social housing. We got social housing, but it's after that. We don't come in first and say, oh, the council want the social housing before you go to planning. So it's got to be after planning. And how do we decide? Because private social landlords, they're also vying for these. So are the prices set, and who decides whether we get them or whether RSL gets them? Because it is a way to boost our housing stock, an easy way of doing it. All depends what the cost on the house is, and that depends. Will they then like one after another, or you give this and somebody else is going to give more? So how do you work that? Denise, don't know.
I'll take that, because it's the role I used to do many years ago, was manage the social housing grant programme. So we do it fairly. There isn't a set allocation for, you know, the RSLs and the council. We manage the pot very fairly based on the priorities. We do a priority list which goes to the cabinet members every year. We go through each scheme. So the RSLs and us will put a bid in, and we'll say, this is how much social housing grant we got this year, and these are the schemes that we want to come forward, and prioritise them in that way. We speak to the RSLs very transparently, and Jill, who manages the social housing grant programme, has monthly meetings with them to go through what's called the programme development plan. And alongside that, then we keep a register of interest. And that is when a site will come up and somebody will say, I'd like to register my interest on that particular site to pick up the 106 properties, or I'd like to register my interest. We're going to work with a developer to buy that site as part of a package deal or whatever. So it's all fair, and we have a really, really good partnership with the RSLs. So there's never been any accusations of unfairness or Coastal are getting more than Pobl, or the council are taking it all, because it's all done out in the open in partnership between us all.
Thank you, Chair. And just to add to that, in your words was what's to stop the council being greedy and taking all the pot. The honest answer is we simply wouldn't have the resource and the capacity to deliver all of the social housing grant, which funds, I think, about 50% of the sites. So even if we had the will to want to do that, we couldn't meet the demand to build those sites. So in reality, and this isn't just a Swansea issue, this is across Wales, we absolutely cherish our partnerships with housing associations and work very closely with them to hit higher targets. We've got obviously our internal target of 1,000 homes, but in addition to that, I think at last count it was either between 2,000 or 3,000 over the 10-year period with housing associations. So we do really value the partnership working, and we work really closely. We meet on a very regular basis. We have bilateral meetings with housing associations in order to work closely together to deliver more. And coming back, if I may, to your first point about the sheer volume of people who are homeless, a proportion of that number are existing tenants wishing to change property, whether it's to upgrade or upsize or downsize. So they're not all homelessness households. However, we do have a really high volume of people presenting at homeless. And we share your concerns, Chair, that we simply haven't got the number of properties or homes to be able to meet the significant demand that we're seeing. So supply is absolutely, definitely not meeting demand at the moment, and we can't build quick enough. Hence why we're very focused not just on building new properties, but acquisitions which are quicker in the process, and also with 106 being good additions to help us add to our stock, more quickly as well. So it is a serious concern, and I'm sure it keeps most of us in the housing service awake at night worrying about it, to be quite frank. And again, that's not something that's isolated to Swansea. That's something which is happening across Wales in all local authorities, but in particular the stockholding authorities.
Right, in case it's of interest, I've actually got the percentage split of the waiting list from this morning, and it's actually 7,948 now, so it's dipped below 8,000. But 17% were homeless or threatened with homeless out of that number. 63% are waiting list applicants with other still got housing need and could still be in, difficult circumstances, but not actually homeless. And then 20% were council tenants waiting for a transfer. So that kind of gives a bit more of a breakdown.
Oh, thank you for that. That's interesting, that is. Yeah, on to another pipeline schemes, the 6.2, when it's got sites are in early stages of feasibility work, including site survey. Is that grant funded?
It will be, because we'll add it to the overall scheme costs, but it'll generally be that we'll have to fund that up front. So social housing grant for us is paid in arrears, which does affect our viability. So for ourselves, they can claim it as they go along. For local authorities, the Welsh Government rules mean we claim it in arrears. So some of it will be grant funded. So the social housing grant doesn't cover the full scheme. There's a formula that they use, a standard viability model. So it used to be 58% for any scheme, whatever it costs, you get 58% funding, and you'd pay the other 42%. Now it varies from scheme to scheme according to this formula the Welsh Government use. So all the survey costs and everything will go into the final costs, and we will try and claim those back, or as much of them, a percentage as we can back.
I was thinking, see, if this was part funded up front, then we could move forward at a pace with other land. Instead, we've got to wait now to get your money back, as it were, because if we're going to pay it up front.
Yeah, we are starting to do those surveys and all that work up front on our sites. But, some of the surveys are time bound, so there's no point doing them all in year one if you're not going to get to some of the sites till year 6, because the surveys will have expired. So we're trying to, be smart and do them sort of in order. But you're right, we're trying to do as much of the upfront work as we can so that we're ready to hit the ground. But it does take a long time to get from concept to on site. And as we said, we're hoping now to try and speed that process up, because we really need to.
Yeah, because I was just thinking, if we moved ahead at a pace, we could eliminate the difficult land, and then look for the good land.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it came to the 7.1, which then it started to worry me then that we're moving forward, and the Welsh Government want us to move forward, and then they put objects in front of us that stop us moving forward, because they tell you to do certain things, and then they say you've got to do it to Welsh housing quality standard as well, because you've only got one pot of money. You can't do everything with that pot of money. So it is worrying that you've got to build houses to this standard, but then we're telling you you've got to do this to your 230,000 other houses in Wales. That's a worry to me. And then coming to the end, yeah, the pattern book. Just explain a bit more about the pattern book to me. If you're gonna, is it houses that we will build, or is it houses that the 106 will build? do we give them the pattern book and say you've got to build now to those standards? That was one thing that come to me. And then the next paragraph was maintain the budget for acquisitions. Could we put in maintain or increase where possible? So not just keep the same budget. I know we don't know what's around the corner. We only know this year it's going to be less, and then that's all. The rest was the 106, which is all right. Okay.
In terms of the pattern book, yeah, that's generally going to be for our own properties. So we've been trying to come up with a perfect design that fits all the renewable kit in, that has the right orientations and everything. So having that pattern book will mean we don't have to design properties. We've just got all the house types ready to go and move forward on a site. So it'll help us speed up. In terms of the 106 properties, they'll generally be designed by the developer, but the affordable houses that we pick up through 106 would have to be to the Welsh Government's design standards anyway. So the market houses may not be WHQS, WDQR, but the affordable houses will be. So they'll have to be of that standard.
Yeah, sorry, there was a question at the start that you asked around the competing priorities with the specification meeting Welsh Housing Quality Standard as an example. Just to say that we had a report that came to Cabinet, which is due to come to Council next week, around the HRA development programme, and it addresses the competing priorities that we're seeing, with one pot of money, as Carol mentioned, being effectively having to provide us with the decarbonisation, Welsh Housing Quality Standard 2, and various other calls on that pot of money. So you will see in that report that what we're saying is we've got 3 priorities, and priority 4 is that we will intend to decarbonise existing council homes, but the caveat to that is if we have additional Welsh Government funding to be able to do so, because when we last looked at it, it was going to cost in the hundreds of millions to do that, which we simply don't have. And what we need to do, understandably right now, is build new homes and try and address homelessness as our top priority. So you'll see that report on the council agenda, which will give a bit more flesh on the bones and a bit more detail about what we consider our priorities, what we feel we can do within the remit of our current financial constraints, and what we feel we can't do right now unless we've got additional grants or funding from Welsh Government.
And just for me to finish, it was nice to see a lot of the work is internal, and it's our building services. And to me, who done an apprenticeship, it's great to see that to do this, then you've got to have the apprentices to carry on the work. And I think it's excellent the way we're doing it in-house. Mike?
In regards to 106, sometimes it's not always straightforward, because with the main big trust developer, they will put forward the site and say in principle within the planning conditions that we want X amount of affordable housing and a percentage. And sometimes, I know the 3 of us here chaired planning here, the chair and myself, the 3 of us are on the planning committee, and we've often seen it where the developer will start a site, plus come across unforeseen circumstances or materials, and then they want to come back and they want to amend the 106 and reduce the actual number of 106 properties. So it's not always a straightforward. It starts out that.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I didn't want to go into a planning meeting. But okay, if you want to add anything else before? No, thank you very much. Excellent report. Nobody else? Okay, thank you very much. I got the agenda or something, haven't I?
Yeah, I can fight.
Right, next thing on the agenda is a work plan. We got 1 month left. Do we meet in May? No. So the only thing that's missing, we'll have the Tower Riverside corridor on the next meeting. Yeah, and also, as Sam has pointed out, we haven't put in the end of year report. It was nice to see Mr. Phil Holmes on the line, so oh, he's gone. Okay, nothing else. Thank you very much.